Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. I want to cover what I see as a very important story. We're going to talk about Putin revealing the new reserve currency, right? An alternative reserve currency. This is interesting in light of the recent speech that President Xi Jinping from China gave at the 2022 BRICS summit. For people unfamiliar, BRICS is an economic bloc. It is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. I think they're going to be bringing in some other countries into BRICS as well. But it's so he made some statements, Xi Jinping, about what they see for the future, right? They talked about Agenda 2030. So for people who don't understand, Putin is absolutely on board with UN Agenda 2030. He's totally on board with the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, the Great Reset, all of that, right? Russia pushed the you know what's during the lockdowns, okay? China's still doing these crazy lockdowns. So Putin is not our guy. He's former KGB. He is an intelligence officer, and he is incredibly intelligent and should not be underestimated. But he's, anyways, he's very good at playing into that, right? So let's first bring up that. And then I have a lot of other economic news that I want to talk about today. We're going to talk about China. We're going to talk about the IMF. We're going to talk about the latest jobless claims. So it's a lot to get into, but let's first start with this article from Bitcoin.com targeting the US dollar's hegemony. Russia, China, and BRICS nations plan to craft a new international reserve currency. So that's all obviously about challenging US supremacy, which Russia and China are doing right now in other ways. So while inflation data in Europe and the US has risen significantly higher last month, Russia and members of the BRICS countries revealed leaders in the five major emerging economies are in the midst of, quote, creating an international reserve currency, unquote. Analysts believe the BRICS reserve currency is meant to rival the US dollar, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF's special drawing rights currency. So that is interesting. Vladimir Putin reveals the creation of a new international reserve currency at the 14th BRICS summit. Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia consider joining BRICS. Why is that interesting? Well, I don't know if you all remember, but earlier this year on the live stream I do on DLive, one of the things that we covered was Saudi Arabia saying that they were going to allow oil trades with China in the yuan. They were talking about a petro yuan, right, to kind of rival the petrodollar. And Xi Jinping came to Saudi Arabia and he met with Mohammed bin Salman. And so I thought that was really interesting. And so now, if Saudi Arabia joins BRICS, it just kind of goes to show you Saudi Arabia does not have confidence in the United States anymore, certainly not Joe Biden. And they are leaning more toward China. So that is very, very interesting. And that would expand BRICS, by the way, to be a pretty powerful economic bloc. This, in my opinion, is part of the multipolar world order. I think that as Brandon O'Connell has elucidated, what we're witnessing right now is the fight for Eurasia, the battle for Eurasia, the Mackinder World Island, the Bunting Cloverleaf map. If you have read Zbigniew Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard, he specifically lays out, and that book is from like 1996, guys. He lays out Ukraine being this key geographical location to controlling Eastern Europe and being able to exert soft power into Asia. Now, obviously, China is the United States' main economic rival. They're vying to be the new world superpower. So this battle for Eurasia is super, super important. And I think that People need to understand what's happening in Ukraine in that context, as that the United States is fighting to maintain its geopolitical dominance as the unipolar world superpower, the main superpower in the world from the post-World War II order. We had the Bretton Woods system set up, and we had the creation of what, the left calls the liberal world order. Obviously, that is not perfect, right? I'm not a fan of the current system in the United States. However, I'm smart enough to understand that having the US running things is far better than Russia and China, right? Okay, so that's what we're seeing right now, is this battle for Eurasia, Mackinder World Island, this specific geographic location. Because of where it's at, it's also been known as the breadbasket of Europe, right? It's an area of strategic importance, shall we say. And so I think that the United States is attempting to reassert its dominance, which is a good thing in that regard. And I know that it's an unpopular thing to say about the Ukraine conflict. A lot of people, and you can understand Russia's side as well. NATO should not have been trying to push further eastward, right? They kept trying to do this eastward expansion when they've been warned repeatedly by Putin not to do that, because they were basically putting nukes on Russia's doorstep, and that's unacceptable. We have our own problems with that. We wouldn't allow Russia to put nukes on our border, obviously. So anyways, let's move on. Let's continue this article. During the last month, the West has been struggling with red-hot inflation and energy prices skyrocketing higher. Politicians in the UK, Europe, and the United States have been trying to blame the economic calamity on a number of things, like the Russia-Ukraine war and COVID-19. Data from last month's consumer prices in America and Europe have climbed to all-time highs, and many analysts say Western countries are in a recession or about to experience one. Meanwhile, at the end of June, members of the BRICS nations met at the 14th BRICS summit to discuss world affairs. Now, this image is from one of the BRICS meetings. You see them all together holding hands. Pretty wild. Yeah, so you can see here, though, you can read the transcript of what Xi Jinping said, and what he said is like, yeah, we're moving away from the United States. We want to create our own, we want to be our own group. We want to be able to have bilateral trade agreements. We don't want to have to go through the United States. And then they were talking about this sustainable energy, this push for Agenda 2030. Very disturbing stuff. Very much in line with the Davos World Economic Forum Klaus Schwab agenda, which if you don't know yet, you should know is not anything that we want. It's not a good thing. During the BRICS summit, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that the 5 member economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, plan to issue a new global reserve currency. The dollar has been decimated. Its purchasing power has been all but destroyed. So this is pretty disturbing. Quote, the matter of creating the international reserve currency based on the basket of currencies of our countries is under review, unquote, Putin said at the time. Quote, we are ready to openly work with all fair partners, unquote, he added. Additionally, Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia are considering joining the BRICS group. Analysts believe the BRICS move to create a reserve currency is an attempt to undermine the US dollar and the IMF's SDRs. Yes, of course it is. Of course it is. Quote, this is a move to address the perceived U.S. hegemony of the IMF, unquote. The global head of markets at ING, Chris Turner, explained at the end of June, quote, it will allow BRICS to build their own sphere of influence and unit of currency within that sphere, unquote. While some of the news of a reserve currency created by BRICS may be a surprise to some, specific accounts about the member countries countering the U.S. dollar have been reported on for quite some time. time. At the end of May 2022, a Global Times report noted members were urged to end their dependence on the dollar's global dominance. Yeah, exactly. Russian business relations in BRICS countries intensify. China's President Xi Jinping says countries that, quote, obsess with a position of strength, unquote, and, quote, seek their own security at the expense of others, unquote, will fail. Yeah, that was him trying to take a jab at the United States, but that's pretty funny considering China's own obsession with its position of strength in the Belt and Road project. Putin explained the following month that contacts between Russian business circles and the business community of the BRICS countries have intensified. The Russian president further noted that Indian retail chain stores would be hosted in Russia and Chinese cars and hardware would be imported regularly. Putin's recent statements and commentary at the BRICS summit have made people believe the BRICS members are not just a talk shop anymore. Correct. In addition to South Africa, Russia has also increased foreign aid and has delivered weapons to sub-Saharan African countries. Furthermore, Putin and other BRICS leaders have been targeting U.S. hegemony and exceptionalism in specific statements published by the media. Yes, indeed. At this year's St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, Putin addressed the crowd with a 70-minute speech and talked about the U.S. ruling the world's financial system for years. Quote, nothing lasts forever, unquote, Putin said. Quote, Americans think of themselves as exceptional, and if they think they're exceptional, that means everyone else is second class, he told the forum attendees. Speaking with Russian ambassadors in a biennial speech, Putin said the West was weakening a great deal in terms of economic power. Quote, domestic socioeconomic problems that have become worse in industrialized countries as a result of the economic crises are weakening the dominant role of the so-called historical West, unquote. Be ready for any development of the situation, even for the most unfavorable development. What he's talking about is the growing wealth inequality in the West, because every time we have an economic crisis, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and the wealth divide gets bigger, causing internal problems and weakening the United States as a country. Russia and Putin have been saying that the U.S. dominance in the world of finance has been dying for years now. In October 2018, speaking at Valdai Forum, Putin said the U.S. sanctioning specific countries, including Russia, would undermine trust in the U.S. dollar. The Russian president noted that most of the fallen empires have made the same mistake. Quote, it's a typical mistake of an empire. An empire always thinks it can allow itself to make some little mistakes, take some extra costs because its power is such that they don't mean anything. But the quantity of those costs, those mistakes, inevitably grows. He continued, and the moment comes when it can't handle them, neither in the security sphere or the economic sphere. What he's talking about is death by 1,000 cuts, right? All these little things that add up over time to destroy an empire. Moreover, in June, Bloomberg published a report about the BRICS summit and noted China's President Xi Jinping suggested that NATO was responsible for antagonizing the Russian Federation. Xi also said that certain countries that bolster exceptionalism will falter by suffering from security vulnerabilities. Quote, politicizing, instrumentalizing, and weaponizing the world economy, using a dominant position in the global financial system to wantonly impose sanctions would only hurt others as well as hurting oneself, leaving people around the world suffering. Quote, those who obsess with a position of strength, expand their military alliance, and seek their own security at the expense of others will only fall into a security conundrum. He's taking aim at the U.S., of course. The financial world splits in half. Alternative payment rails stockpiling gold in the clash of a robust dollar and ruble. The strengthening of the BRICS nations has been going on well before the conflict in Ukraine, For instance, in 2014, Russia fully developed the system for transfer of financial messages, FPFS, and later the Mir payment system was launched. That same year, in response to the annexation of Crimea, Russia started to stockpile gold in vast amounts. This is something we know China has done as well, and that they are not being honest about how much gold they do have stockpiled. So that is interesting. China has been hoarding massive amounts of gold as well, as both countries hiked their gold reserve purchases a great deal a few years before the war. Gee, almost as if the whole thing was planned from, and they knew and were preparing for it. Unlike us, Russian banks also joined the China International Payment System, or CIPS, making it easier for the two countries to trade. In April last year, China opened its borders to billions of dollars of gold imports, according to a report from Reuters. Yes, so there you have it. Since World War I, the US dollar has been the world's global reserve currency, and America emerged as the largest international creditor. Fast forward to today, and the dollar is booming against a number of other currencies, and the US dollar is the most robust it has been in an entire generation. The US dollar currency index gained over 10% this year and outpaced strong currencies like the Japanese yen. Just recently, the euro met parity with the dollar, and other currencies like the Indian rupee, the Polish zloty, Colombian peso, and South African rand have faltered against the greenback in recent times. However, the Russian ruble has been a strong competitor to the dollar this year and has been one of the best performing fiat currencies in 2022. With inflation soaring and interest rates getting hiked by the Federal Reserve, Kamakshi Trivedi, the co-head of a market research group at Goldman Sachs, stressed that it's been a, quote, pretty tough mix, unquote, to deal with. Despite the uncertainty, the analyst at Goldman Sachs thinks the dollar, at least for now, will remain robust, but in comparison to the greenback's recent spike in value, most of that rise is in the past, Trivedi remarked. Exactly. Quote, for now, we still expect the dollar to trade on the front foot, unquote. There might be a bit more to go, but probably the largest part of the dollar move may be behind us, may well be behind us. Yes, exactly. Quite obviously. All right, so that was the first story here that I wanted to get into, this new reserve currency being introduced by Putin, discussed by Putin, and sort of this idea of the expansion of BRICS into the creation of a sort of economic bloc that can counter the US dollar and dollar hegemony. The next article comes from The Economist, Europe's winter of discontent. Even as temperatures soar, Europe faces a bitter energy crisis later this year, and that is, of course, because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. If you have spent the past few days being sizzled alive on a Mediterranean beach or slow roasted on the streets of Berlin, London, or Rome amid a heat wave, cold weather may be the last thing on your mind. But make no mistake, winter is coming, and it promises to be brutal and divisive because of an energy crisis that is rapidly worsening as Vladimir Putin strangles supplies of Russian gas. Several calamities in the past decade have come close to ripping Europe apart, including the Euro crisis in the early 2010s and the migrant crisis in 2015. The winter energy shock of 2022 could yet join them. Yes, exactly. A severe energy crisis has been a danger since Russian tanks rolled into the Ukraine, as sanctions and Russian blackmail threatened to cut Europe from its main supplier. Gas is the choke point. It satisfies a quarter of the continent's energy demand, and Russia supplies a third of that. The figures are higher for some countries, including Germany. Yeah, Germany they're in trouble. Unlike oil and coal, which are fungible and traded globally, gas must either be piped or transported as liquefied natural gas using facilities that take years to build or reconfigure. And yes, Putin understands that all too well. Gas is also a market in which Russia holds the whip hand. Its economy would collapse without oil exports that, on average, have been worth 10% of its GDP over the past 5 years, which is why Russia has gone to extraordinary and largely successful lengths to break the Western crude embargo. But Russia can live without gas exports, which are 2% of GDP. By turning down the taps on its pipelines, it thinks it can inflict more pain on Europe than it visits on itself, which is interesting, of course. So, anyways, yeah, what they're saying is they're going to have to start rationing at a certain point, and they think it's going to be a problem, and that's not surprising. Consumers who use gas directly for heating and cooking, as well as indirectly as electricity, have little idea of what may hit them. At the moment, many are protected by price cap subsidies and long-term contracts. The typical German pays at least 70% less than the market price for gas. Industrial users, such as chemicals and glass-making firms, are in trouble, as well as a broad list of businesses, including many German champions. Across the Eurozone, a halt to Russian gas flows could lower GDP growth by 3.4 percentage points and raise inflation by 2.7 percentage points, according to UBS, a bank. In Germany, the hit would be still worse. You may think a recession and inflation would be tolerable. After all, in 2020, Europe's COVID hit GDP fell by 6%. But the energy threat is more insidious. Shortages could trigger beggar thy neighbor behavior as states hoard gas, stopping it from flowing on to the next country. Britain has threatened as much. Gaps in the wholesale price of gas in different EU countries suggest that firms fear a breakdown in the single market. Government debts are higher than ever. A stagflationary shock could raise fears of default or even of an Italian debt crisis that would threaten the entire Eurozone. A popular backlash over energy prices could also erode popular support across the continent for standing up to Putin. For all of these reasons, European governments must rouse themselves to face the energy shock now. As with vaccines, they need to transcend national divisions. The European Commission is working on a plan to present an emergency summit on July 26. Given their roles in the gas trade, the plan would include Britain and Norway. Supply needs to be maximized, which is why common purchases of LNG cargoes are worth pursuing, and why the Netherlands should postpone closing its Groningen gas field next year. And then here it comes. Next is the need for a common hierarchy governing rationing applied across the continent. Intensive energy users should suffer first, consumers last. Countries need to share storage capacity and guarantee free movement of gas. The more integrated the system, the more resilient it will be. Last, politicians should be honest with the public. Consumer prices need to rise now in order to curtail demand and help build up storage. Help will come next winter from even small voluntary changes in household habits. Oh, wow. Such as keeping the heating lower. Just fun stuff. Fun stuff here, guys. Absolutely amazing. By the way, I will include the links for everything in the video description. Moving on, home price growth slowed for the second straight quarter. In May, S&P Case-Shiller says home prices in May were 19.7% higher with the same month compared with the same month last year, according to the S&P CoreLogic Case-Shiller National Home Price Index. This marks the second month of slower increases as the housing market cools due to higher mortgage rates and increasing concerns over inflation. In April, the annual gain was 20.6%. Yeah, so it's going to get bad, guys. Housing prices in May were up 19.7% compared with last month. This marks the second month of slower increases as the housing market cools due to higher mortgage rates and inflation concern. In April, the annual gain was 20.6%. The 10-city composite rose 19% year over year, down from 19.6% in the previous month. The 20-city composite increased 20.5%, down from 21.2% in April. Yeah, so I don't think that this obviously now is not the best time to be buying a home. Not that people can afford it anyways, but just generally speaking. IMF slashes global GDP forecast as economic outgrowth looks gloomy and more uncertain. Yeah, you think? The IMF now expects the world economy to grow 3.2% in 2022 before slowing to a 2.9% GDP rate in 2023, marking a downgrade of 0.4 and 0.7 percentage points respectively from April. The Washington-based institute said the revised outlook indicated that the downside risks outlined in its earlier report were now materializing. Those include soaring global inflation, China's slowdown, and the war in Ukraine. So I want to bring a clip up real quick about that.
Let me ask you about the European economy, because we've just seen this headline.
Yeah, IMF cuts world GDP outlook a third time.
Saying that we've seen a new level on European gas prices, or at least back up to levels we haven't seen since early March. This is alarming for those following the European gas story.
Yeah, that's literally what we just talked about.
What is the downside risk for the European economy for you?
Oh, hello, good morning. And yes, it's a very significant downside risk. I mean, in our baseline projections we just released today, we forecast that growth in the euro area is going to slow down to 1.2% next year in 2023. But we highlight that in... Okay,
so you can see here, outlook risks overwhelmingly tilted to the downside. 2022 GDP estimate cut to 3.2 from 3.6, prominent risk of recession in 2023. 2022 inflation rate rose to 8.3% from 7.4%.
Case there would be a full shutdown of Russian gas flows to Europe, the downgrade could be much more severe by another 0.8 to about 2 percentage point downgrade in terms of the economic activity for the area.
What do you think would actually, what are the chances of that actually being even lower? If you've had to revise it down, the forecast twice in the last few months, what's your worst base case and how quickly could we get there?
Well, this is why this time we...
You know what I think is funny? Is in this clip here, he is going to go on to call the U.S. labor market vibrant, and he claims that the unemployment rate is 3.6%, which we know to be a lie. They're not telling you the truth. They're not reporting the truth, just putting that out there. But let's go forward here and hear the nonsense.
Alternative scenario that highlights a number of plausible downside risks, and one of these plausible downside risks is this scenario of a full shutdown of Russian gas flows to Europe. So we view this as quite likely, but of course not as likely as the baseline. Still, there's still hope that somehow gas could still be flowing to the euro area.
Are there parts of the Eurozone, Pierre-Olivier, that now you do assume will be in recession? Of course, we focus a lot, our thinking here, on Germany. And can you...
Yes, on Germany, as we indicated, because they rely a lot more on Russian oil.
In running, we actually look at what happens if we have effective sharing of gas resources, and it can mitigate and absorb, of course, some of the impact, as well as, securing some alternative supplies, LNG supplies from other countries. So all of these mitigating policies will have an impact and will help the European economies.
Right.
How close is the U.S. going to come to a recession?
Well, in our baseline, we're not seeing a recession in the U.S. either in 2022 or 2023.
That is such a joke. Guys, we're already there. We're already in a recession. The Biden administration was running around just the other day, literally redefining what a recession is so that they can avoid saying that we're in one. And all you have to do is look at reality around you. Look at how much your food prices have gone up, how much gas has gone up. The cost of living. It's just ludicrous to me that they continue to spout this nonsense because they're that detached from reality, from what the average person is struggling with.
We are seeing a significant slowdown from 2.3% in 2022 to 1% in 2023. So this is a quite significant slowdown. And just to give you an idea on, if we look at Q4 to Q4, in 2023, growth slows down to 0.6%. So this is a very low number. And what we're seeing is a very narrow path for the US economy to avoid a recession at this stage. A small shock, a small downside risk could be enough to knock it off.
Yeah, so at this point, he's going to call the US labor market vibrant. He's going to try to make some excuses here. So just be prepared, guys, and understand that these people aren't telling you the truth.
The definition of recession, if I could take you there, Pierre-Olivier, because it seems that as we sit on the precipice of perhaps seeing a technical recession in the US, that will then provoke a lot of conversations about whether it's possible to call it that when unemployment is as low as it is and the labor market
It's not, though.
as healthy as it is. How do you tie in the labor market and weak growth?
Yes, I mean, the U.S. is in a situation where the labor market right now is very tight. We have unemployment rates that are at levels that we had before the pandemic, 3.6%, very robust, hiring, lots of job vacancies. So certainly the labor market is very vibrant right now.
I'm sorry, but that's just so ridiculous. Let's go back to, oh my goodness, our article here. Yeah, as the IMF slashes their global GDP forecast, they try to say that the US labor market is vibrant. It's certainly not. And our unemployment rate is certainly not 3.6%. That is absolutely false. All right, moving on to layoffs. Which are continuing. Shopify stock sinks 14% after company says it will lay off 10% of workers. This is just from today, guys, and this keeps happening day after day after day. We're seeing more and more layoffs. While this freak from the IMF will tell you we have a vibrant labor market. Nothing to see here. Shopify plans to lay off roughly 10% of its global workforce, CEO Toby Lutke wrote in a memo to staff on Tuesday. Shopify's shares sunk more than 14%. The Canadian company, which makes tools for companies to sell products online, was one of the biggest beneficiaries of the pandemic-driven e-commerce boom. Yeah, I've never used Shopify. I don't know how this thing works, but I remember hearing a lot about it during the COVID lockdowns. So Shopify is laying off roughly 1,000 workers, or around 10% of its global workforce, the company announced Tuesday. Imagine that you're just sitting, at your desk one day, or maybe you're working remotely and you get an email one day and it just tells you, oh, you've lost your job. Yeah, you're getting fired. Like, it's rough, okay? Especially in this economy. That's terrible. So its shares went down. In the memo to staff, like, you get a little memo saying that you're being fired, guys. I just can't imagine that. I mean, I can, but it's awful. In a memo to staff, CEO Toby Lutke announced that he had misjudged how long the pandemic-driven e-commerce boom would last. And amid a broader pullback in online spending, Shopify would move to cut a number of roles. Shopify had more than 10,000 employees as of December 31st, 2021, according to a securities filing. The cuts will affect all of Shopify's divisions, though most will occur in recruiting, support, and sales, and, quote, across the company, unquote, is eliminating over-specialized and duplicate roles, as well as some groups that were convenient to have but too far removed from building products, Luke said in the memo. Tech companies have been announcing layoffs, hiring freezes, and rescinding job offers in the midst of economic uncertainty and COVID pandemic trends tapering off. Earlier this month, Google parent Alphabet and Facebook owner Meta both said they'd slow the pace of hiring. Companies including Netflix and Coinbase have announced layoffs. Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's move on to the next, and all of this affects the entire economic outlook. So it's not just a one-time thing. A sign inflation could start easing. Right. Walmart is slashing prices on clothing and other products. No, that's because they have inventory that is just sitting there. Many shoppers have pulled back on buying clothing and other discretionary items as the highest inflation in 4 decades pinches their pocketbooks. That's left Walmart and other retailers stuck with too much clothing and bigger ticket stuff sitting on their shelves. To help clear out the backlog, Walmart is cutting prices on some items and marking down products. The increasing levels of food and fuel inflation are affecting how customers spend, Walmart CEO Doug McMillon said in a news release Monday. Apparel in Walmart US is requiring more markdown dollars. The company expects a slowdown on customer spending for general merchandise in the second half of the year, McMillon said. Walmart is the largest retailer in the U.S., and its move could prompt rivals to bring down prices in these areas. While lower prices and markdowns are welcome news for shoppers, they mean lower profits for companies. Clothing and general merchandise are more profitable for Walmart than groceries and consumable items. Walmart, in its announcement Monday, cut its profit outlook for the second quarter and the remainder of the year. Yes, exactly. The company's stock fell 8% during early trading Tuesday. Amazon, Target, and other retailer stocks also dropped following the news from Walmart. Yes, exactly. So there's that. Moving on, I thought this was pretty interesting and pretty funny. BlackRock pulls back support for climate and social resolutions. Proposals that dictate the pace of energy transition receive fewer votes from 8.5 trillion money manager. And if you're aware of Larry Fink and BlackRock, you should know they are not a good company. BlackRock's support for U.S. shareholder proposals on environmental and social issues, this is the woke garbage, fell by nearly half in this year's annual meeting season as the world's largest money manager voted for just 24% of them, which is funny because they like to make these big proclamations, right, about, carbon taxes, and they're literally forcing companies to do things that are going to cost them money, right? For social justice, which I think is unacceptable. That's not freedom. That's like communist garbage, all right? So this is so they like to have that to make these bold statements of, oh, look at us, we're not just this massive investment bank that is ripping off the entire world, that has amassed trillions of dollars under our portfolio, have bought up single family homes and jacked the rents up 40%, bought entire neighborhoods in some instances, which is insane. So pricing young people out of the housing market altogether, because BlackRock can drop more than the asking price, which a regular family cannot compete with, okay? So they're buying up these single family homes, but at the same time, in the other side of their mouth, they're giving lip service to social justice so they can have a good PR image or whatever, but they're evil. And people should remember that. The group had warned of this outcome in May when it argued that shareholder proposals were becoming too prescriptive, and that Russia's invasion of Ukraine had changed the investment calculus. Yeah, what were these ridiculous and radical and communistic shareholder proposals? And this is the other thing, and I've said this before, that when the country is doing well and everything is decadent, people have the time and the money to throw and waste on nonsense. But once you see things start to get real, once the shit hits the fan, so to speak, all of this nonsense isn't going to happen. It is sort of like if you're on a cruise ship, right? And everybody's having fun or whatever, then all of a sudden you hit a freaking iceberg or something and the ship starts sinking. Men immediately become men again. Women immediately become women again. You're not going to see women out there like risking their lives to save people or doing the things that men do. It's just not going to happen. People revert back to the natural their natural way of doing things. And also when recessions happen, the market kind of corrects itself. And a lot of this, like these useless jobs, as you heard, Shopify had duplicate jobs basically. A lot of that redundancy is going to be lost, and people who are pretty much hired to do stupid stuff like diversity, equity, and inclusion, those guys are going to get fired too. So don't think that's not going to happen, and that part is a good thing. Quote, many climate-related shareholder proposals sought to dictate the pace of companies' energy transition plans with little regard to the disruption caused to their financial performance, given continued demand from customers. Others failed to recognize the progress made, BlackRock said in a report on its voting released on Tuesday. These factors made these proposals less supportable. BlackRock's shift has been far more dramatic than most other investors. Total shareholder support for environmental and social proposals dropped from 36% of votes cast in last year's meeting season to 27% this year, according to ISS data analyzed by BlackRock. At BlackRock, the decline was from 43% to 24%. Support for environmental and social proposals from State Street Global Advisors, another very large asset manager, fell from above 25% last year to roughly 20% this year, according to preliminary calculations. Vanguard, also a top 3 manager, has not released any voting information. Haha. Yeah. The thing is, though, what are these banks doing, dictating woke policies and social policies to companies? You understand that that's unacceptable in a country that is supposed to be free, like America, right? You don't get to, force people to do partisan political nonsense, right? That's not cool. And I just think it's funny, and I think it's a good thing that you can see that people are starting to change their minds about this stuff. Even their own shareholders are starting to say, well, maybe that wasn't the best idea. A separate analysis of S-Gauge data by the Conference Board found that investor support on environmental proposals in particular fell from 37% in 2021 to 33% this year. In recent months, BlackRock and its founder, Larry Fink, have come under particular criticism from Republican Party politicians who argue they are pushing a subversive woke capitalism, newsflash, they are, that will handcuff companies, drive up consumer prices, and sacrifice jobs. Exactly. Both BlackRock and State Street have faced questions from state governments in Texas and West Virginia, which plan to boycott financial services groups that discriminate against fossil fuels. Big asset managers wanted to appear to be responsible stewards, said Lucian Bebchuk, a professor at Harvard Law School, but they also seek to accommodate corporate managers and avoid adversarial relationships with them, and to reduce the odds of a political and public backlash against their massive power. This combination of incentives explains why BlackRock would want to signal its contribution and commitment to addressing climate change by supporting more disclosure but not wanting to go beyond that. Exactly. Correct. And it's just nonsense anyways, and they all know it. Jobless claims rise again in another sign that the labor market is cooling. Oh, but the chief economist of the IMF just called it vibrant. Unbelievable. Initial claims totaled 251,000 for the week ending July 16th, up 7,000 from the week before and above the 240,000 Dow Jones estimate. That was the highest weekly level since mid-November. So more and more people are filing first-time jobless claims. The Philadelphia Fed Manufacturing Index fell to a reading of negative 12.3 and produced the lowest employment reading since May of 2021. Guys, so vibrant. So vibrant. Unreal. All right, so the report is here. You can see it. It's seasonally adjusted data. I will link this PDF. It's about 9 pages. You can go through this yourself. But basically, what that's showing is that, yeah, actually, things aren't looking good in the labor market. Unemployment is going to continue to go up. Nearly 20% of Americans are afraid to check their credit card statements as interest rates approach an all-time high. As credit card debt swells and interest rates spike, many spenders are fearful about high balances. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans are afraid to check their credit card statements, according to a recent survey. With rampant inflation and rising interest rates, it is even more important to check your credit card statements regularly. Oh, you don't say. Thank you, Matt Schultz, for reminding us of that. Now we have recession fears and rising rates are a buying opportunity for rich Americans. Oh, this is when the rich make their money. You don't say. I never would have known that during an economic crisis, the wealth gap continues to grow. The rich get richer because they can prey on the vulnerable. I never would have guessed. Here we have upper middle class is getting squeezed. So even people that are making over 6 figures, they are getting squeezed also. Shallow recession calls are totally delusional. Exactly. This time it could be worse than the 70s. And finally, closing out from Redfin, housing market update, homes are taking longer to sell. Yes, buyers can now take their time touring and considering homes before making an offer. Still, selection remains very limited despite supply being up and few homes are being listed and even fewer are selling. Correct. So it is a housing downturn. Now, finally closing out, I'm going to play this clip about China. I have a video up on my channel, China's $62 trillion crisis.
I feel like we've been talking about this same story in different ways.
Yeah, so they're talking about this here too. China's property crisis burns middle class. Exactly. I want to move to a particular timestamp here. I want to go to about, I think 2 minutes in, because I think this is where he says something very, very interesting that I think is well worth understanding. And that is about China and the US decoupling. Right? Because what's happening right now is with the supply chains and stuff and this decoupling is, I think, stress testing, right? For World War III.
Decoupling between the United States and China is inevitable, and the Chinese government is doing the first, just to avoid the shock that would come eventually. So, I think the overall for the market, I think it's bearish. It's oversupply.
Do you see more of these moves coming for other Chinese companies as well?
I think that overall, especially tech companies, all need to delist. That's my view. The Chinese government has decided that decoupling is inevitable. Why don't we do it now?
So the Chinese government has decided that the U.S. and China decoupling is inevitable, so they might as well do it now. And that ties right back to how we started this, right? We started this by talking about BRICS and Putin revealing a new global reserve currency, speaking with Xi Jinping at the BRICS summit, talking about essentially moving forward with Agenda 2030 ideas, Davos, World Economic Forum ideas to continue to try to go after the United States in different ways and challenge U.S. supremacy and preeminence in the world. And as I indicated earlier, this is all about World War III, stress testing, decoupling supply chains in preparation for a potential kinetic war. I don't know, but obviously we're in this sort of Cold War posturing again. And it is, in my opinion, the battle for Eurasia, for the pan-Eurasian superstate with Russia and China working together with other countries like BRICS, bringing in Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt into that economic bloc and trying to exert their own power, challenge U.S. dominance. And then who knows, maybe China goes after Taiwan. We don't know, but that is what could start World War III. And I think that we're seeing the stress tests on all sides, right? China is testing the United States and seeing how far are they willing to go. Solomon Islands, Taiwan. Russia is doing the same thing in Ukraine. So it looks like everybody's kind of preparing for some future conflict, which I think will be over Eurasia, the Battle of Eurasia, and Dugin, Alexander Dugin, he's talked about Eurasianism. So this is very much what this whole thing is about, in my opinion. Anyways, we're gonna wrap it up here. This went longer than I thought it did. Let me know your thoughts on all of this. What do you guys think is going on here? Do you agree with my analyses on it? Let me know.